Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we will be reviewing the Montecarlos Pacamara wash processed El Salvador from Passenger Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Passenger, based out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And this coffee is our February 2024 Coffee of the Month, as it was voted on by you guys as the coffee you most want to see us review. Passenger is a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel a lot over the years, as they're one of our favorite coffee roasters in the entire world. And some people might be wondering why they haven't featured much recently, and the answer is very simple. They haven't really offered a lot of coffees that have caught our interest. That being said, we've never reviewed any of their Montecarlos coffees, and did end up winning that Coffee of the Month poll, so it felt like a great opportunity to revisit Passenger, and we will see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 38. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Passenger's recipe, which is a 15.625 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 99 degrees Celsius, about 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And I actually like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind roast profile for this coffee. So Passenger is notorious for being one of the lighter roasting American coffee roasters, and I did expect them to push this one maybe slightly a bit more than some of their other coffees, given that it is an El Salvadorian coffee. But I was surprised just how light this coffee turned out, as that's to say it's not necessarily the lightest coffee in the entire world, as you could still consider Say's coffees to be lighter than this one. But even then, it skews a little bit more on that light side of things, so I feel like a moderately light in terms of the roast profile fits this one. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and it was classically Passenger, as it had a wonderful bit of clarity and definition to it in a very well-structured sense. The listed cherry felt quite notable as far as the washed coffee part of that goes, given that it didn't offer any of the heavier aspects to it, but still a much better defined cherry component to it, with a slight but well-defined nuttiness and candied aspect, so a lot of what I might have been expecting going into this, though, as mentioned, still a slight bit lighter than I was expecting. But we continue on to day 17, as we opted for the Chemex, and the cup continues to offer a higher than expected level of sweetness with tremendous definition and clarity. The base does have a notably well-defined chocolate that transitions into a sweeter, nutty quality, as well as some subtle fruit characteristics, as there is a slight tart cherry juice aspect to it, lending itself to another very nice day of this coffee. Day 20 through the April brewer, and the cup was the best that had been up to this point, as that well-defined milk chocolate base was at its best, with some sweeter nutty qualities yet again. It does remain in line with the expected Central American characteristics, but it all continues to come out very sweet and clean throughout, so this lent itself to another very nice day. Continue on to day 23, as we ran into the V60 with Passenger's recipe, and I just continued to see the coffee improve, as this is the best that had been up to this point, offering the highest level of sweetness to the point where it was slightly even minty and herbal in the finish. Lovely caramelization, leading to another really nice day of this coffee. Continue on to day 26, opting for the Chemex with Passenger's recipe, and the cup continues to offer really nice consistency and a profile that's well within the line of expectations, as it continues to be reminiscent of what you'd expect of a typical crowd-pleasing coffee, while still offering some really nice sweetness to complement all of that. At the forefront, there is great definition, while on the back end, it opens up a lot more with the fruit profile, as well as what I would describe as a lovely bit of cherry soda, as it felt very apt given that we were getting a fair bit of cherry, and in addition to that, a nice bit of herbality kind of blending itself towards that cherry soda note. Continue on to day 29, as we ran into the V60 with Passenger's recipe again, and I felt that there was a slight bit of inconsistency, as it's initially a little tobacco-like right off of brew, which was the only time I necessarily experienced that specific quality. But I think that's one of the things that lent itself towards the Chemex a little bit more than this brew method, as it continued to have many of those great fruit qualities, including the plum-like component, as there was a darker stone fruit aspect that was present within this one. It's followed up a bit more by some brightness and intensity, continuing to remain very reminiscent of, as the previously mentioned day, cherry soda. Continue on to day 32, as we ran it back through the Chemex, and I felt like there was the preference towards this brew method, as the clarity really seemed to just increase enough to the extent where I said, the definition to this cup specifically is on the higher end that I've experienced from El Salvadorian coffees, so I'm going to pursue this one, presenting that really nice level of toffee as well as some herbal depth to the cup as well. Dark fruits present in abundance, as well as just an overall solid experience. Day 35 final notes, we have one more try through the Chemex, and this cup continues to remain consistent with this brew method as it offers that crowd-pleasing aspect of the coffee with some sweeter depth to it in a much more classic sense, still reminiscent of what I described as that cherry soda as well as that milk chocolate base. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s, so let's go through those, and we'll start with the body level 4. So this one definitely had a lot of texture, and that's really surprising given that we opted for the Chemex. And I remember making this tasting wheel and looking at that body note saying, I really made this coffee with the Chemex, but yeah, it had a lot of body to it. So that's scoring there at that level 4, a much more full-bodied cup of coffee than I think I might have expected, even given what this coffee is. In El Salvadorian Pacamara, that itself would lend itself towards being a little bit more full-bodied, and that's what we were experiencing with this one. Continue on to the cleanliness level 4, and I think that's where the Chemex really seemed to help this coffee, as it was already a pretty clean coffee to begin with, but I think it just kind of sharpened up those edges, made it a little bit more well-defined, and in that sense it made it a very easy to taste coffee. The flavor profiles in this one were very pronounced and very well-defined, so great cleanliness, one of the cleaner El Salvadoran coffees we've reviewed. To continue on to the finish, level 4, not too much to add to this one. At times it had that sort of slightly herbal, minty finish to it, and it's not something that I would say was overly pronounced or defined, but I think given that it kind of complemented the cherry components to it, that's why I was able to come up with that note of the cherry soda. It continued to remain similar to that in so many regards, so that's where the finish comes into play. Sweetness, level 4. And when reading through the description of this coffee, I feel like I wasn't entirely sure if it was going to live up to the expectations of being defined as a very sweet coffee, but to my surprise, it did turn out a fair bit sweeter than even I was expecting. I do usually have pretty good results with Passengers coffees in terms of the sweetness, but this one right here definitely lent itself towards a little bit more than even I was expecting. True level 4, not anything above that. Let's continue on to the chocolate level 4. So none of the fruit profiles were enough to justify pushing over that level 3 mark, but the chocolate itself was a very well-defined base to it, and I would say that probably the most consistent and pronounced note throughout the entirety of this coffee, so that one was the most justified flavor profile at that level 4. Caramel, level 4. There was a slight bit of a candied aspect to it, but honestly, I think that the toffee was a little bit more reminiscent of the experience we had in this coffee, as that was present in near equal abundance as a chocolate, but an ever-pronounced and ever-present component within this one. Then we have a handful of level 3s, a lot of level 3s actually. We'll start with the acidity level 3. Not the brightest coffee. Again, going into it, I didn't expect it to be the brightest coffee, but it's a trade-off that I'm willing to make. I didn't fully expect it or need it to be an overly bright coffee. I think it was made up for with enough other attributes in this one. Florality, spice, salt, level 3. While making this tasting wheel, I felt a fair bit of all of those things. Kind of floral chocolate aspect of this one was definitely present at the start. A little bit of honey too was also present. Spice, just kind of, I would say, generic spiced quality to it. And in addition to that, I was noticing a little bit more saltiness while drinking this one. But what I'm much more interested in discussing is actually the fruit profiles in this one, as the berry fruit is there at that level 3 mark. So I think maybe I was expecting a slight bit more of those berry aspects, given that it does have that cherry note on here. And I would say that the cherry was the most pronounced fruit profile of it. But I said, it's a little bit more complementary as opposed to at the forefront within this coffee. So I feel like the level 3 is a better place to put it, especially given we've reviewed so many heavily berry forward coffees on this channel. Citrus fruit, level 3. This one was maybe a little bit more of a generic citric quality to it, and I think I was kind of expecting, well, I wasn't even expecting much of a citric quality to this coffee, but it was in near equal abundance to the other factors, and that being the stone fruit, which is also there at that level 3. Mentioned briefly the darker plum attributes of this one, the darker stone fruits. So having that in line with the plum, I could see all 3 of those fruit factors being at play within this coffee. Final thing worth discussing is the savoriness at the level 3, and that's a little bit more of that nutty quality, which isn't something I mentioned too much. I think maybe the other things really took focus on this coffee, specifically the chocolate base, as well as the toffee-like aspect, and then that cherry soda attribute, all of which seemed a little bit more prominent and pronounced than the nuttiness, which is more than fine with me. It's not something that I was necessarily looking for too much within this coffee, but as I am looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what we were getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I feel like this coffee is a great example and representation of what Passenger does really well. This coffee isn't going to wow you in any regard. It's nothing out of the ordinary. It's very much in line with that crowd-pleasing label. But that being said, it's just so well done, so well structured that a lot of the components in this one are just very easy to detect, and it's a very even coffee. It's a very well-balanced coffee, and you can pick out so many things from this one, which is one of the main reasons I enjoy Passenger as much as I do. One of the biggest highlights I wanted to give this coffee was that sweetness that I've been mentioning a fair bit, as I wasn't really expecting it to be this sweet, but that definitely earned it a little bit of additional points by having that sweeter quality. As far as it goes for me, really nice. It's not something that I'm going to remember 5 years from now, but it's a coffee that at the time I was consuming it, I found to be an enjoyable, much more down-to-earth, crowd-pleasing coffee, which does lead us to the type of person we would suggest this coffee to, and that's a very easy, straightforward recommendation. This one is definitely much more in line with that crowd-pleasing sort of coffee, as it has all those aspects: great clarity, great sweetness, and then it has a much more subtle fruit profile to it, but it skews definitely in the more traditional profiles of chocolate, as well as like the caramel aspect to it. In addition to that, it offers plenty of body too, so there are plenty of things that you can take away from this one. But honestly, I think that's the best way I can leave this review. There's not too much to really add to it. I think we've gone over it. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, and I know a lot of people have tried this coffee as well as this one over the years, I'd definitely love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Montecarlos Pacamara, wash processed El Salvador from Passenger Coffee. Thank you for watching.